Hi everyone and welcome to this tutorial. Today we're walking you through how to make the Tamarama set. You can see here on screen the pattern includes the shirt, the shorts, and it also includes a longer pair of pants. The link to the pattern is below and everything you need is included in the instructions booklet. Let's jump into it and get started sewing. Take the front section and the band, right sides together, pin the band to the front section. Now stitch the band to the front section and press the seam towards the band. We'll now edge stitch along that seam line and then we'll press the opposite long sides under 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch. Then turn the whole band under to the wrong side of the shirt and stitch along the folded side of the band. So we'll repeat this on the opposite side, so the bands will finish on the underside of the shirt. Now you'll find the pleat mark on the pattern, so I'm just transferring that onto my pattern piece. And we're just going to stitch down 2 inches or 5 centimeters. Now take it to the ironing board and open up that pleat as you can see I'm doing here. You can also stitch across that pleat just to hold it in position. Now take your yoke and match the centers. Now pin and stitch the yoke to the back section. Now grab your front pieces and right sides together, pin and stitch the front sections to the yoke. Now press the seams back towards the yoke on the front and the back sections. Now it's time to fuse the interfacing to the collar piece and the collar stand. I like to use a piece of fabric over the top. This way it stops any edges of the interfacing getting stuck to my iron. So you can see here the collar piece and the collar stand have the interfacing. Now we're going to take the collar stand and turn the lower edge of that band under by 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch. Just take care as you press around the curved edges. Now pin the collar pieces right sides together at the top edges. Stitch the collar pieces together and clip the corners. Turn it right sides out and give the collar a really good press. Now top stitch the side and top edges and stay stitch the lower edges together. Now I've just got some pins in here to mark where the clip-ins are. These are circle marks on your pattern. It's really important to match these and transfer all of these markings onto your pattern pieces. Pin the collar to the collar stand. This is the collar band with the interfacing fused towards the back. Stitch those pieces together. I like to start at the center back and stitch outwards towards each side. Now take the remaining collar stand and pin that to the remaining collar piece. You'll see on the end there, the collar stand with the interfacing is protruding 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch lower than the collar stand on top. Now sew that piece together. This can be a little bit fiddly because there is lots of curves, so we really recommend taking your time and slowing down with this piece of sewing. Now clip the seam and trim the excess edge. Now turn the collar right sides out and give it another press. Stay stitch the neckline of the top section before you attach the collar. You'll notice we have the top section with the wrong side facing upwards. Make sure you have transferred all your marks from the pattern onto your pattern pieces on the neckline and the lower edge of the collar stand. This will guide you as you pin the collar stand to the neckline. Now stitch the collar stand to the neckline. I'm just folding back the opposite collar stand so it won't get in the way when I stitch the collar stand with the interfacing to the top section at the neckline. Press the seam allowance up towards the inside of the band. Now clip that seam. Press the folded edge of the collar stand over the seam, enclosing all of the raw edges. Pin the folded edges of the stand to the neckline seam. That's fully enclosing all of the raw edges now. So this is up to you. You can sew the collar stand down with pins, or I prefer to actually hand base the collar stand, folded edge down to the neckline. That way I can take the pins out and I don't have the bulkiness of the pins as I'm stitching on the seam line. Begin edge stitching at the centre back of the collar stand. Continue around the entire collar stand as I'm doing here. and you'll finish at the center back. I've now sewn the seams together of the top section and the sleeves. I've pressed all my seams open and finished off the edges with my overlocker. On the head of the sleeve, I've also sewn a long gather stitch in between the notches. I've also finished off my hems with my overlocker or serger, and I've also finished off the edges on my sleeves. Now turn the sleeve sections right sides out and pin it to the armhole section of the top. Here you can see the shoulder point mark. Match that with the center point of the sleeve. And then you can work back from those points, matching each notch.
Another little sewing tip here. So the ease factor of the gather stitch is very minimal. This stitch acts more like a stay stitch to assist in stitching the sleeve to the bodice.
Once you've pinned together the sleeve to the armhole, bring that over to your machine, stitch that together and finish the raw edges. Press the hem under 5 centimeters or 2 inches. I like to make a double hem. I open that back out and then I just align the edge of the sleeve with that folded crease line and give the entire sleeve a really good press. Now turn that fold under and there you have the double hem. Give that another press and then you can stitch the sleeve hems in position. Now it's time to press our hem down 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch. Just a little tip for the curved edges at the side seams. To keep those nice and flat, I just let that go a little bit more narrow. It might come down to 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch wide. But you'll find when you press that in position, then it will stay flatter and you'll avoid any rippling in the hem. After you've sewn the hem, give it another good press. Onto the buttonholes. I've marked my buttonholes into position on the shirt. They're 10 centimeters or 4 inches apart and 2 centimeters or 3/4 of an inch in from the center edge. Repeat this process on the opposite side for the buttons. I'm using my automatic button stitch to stitch my buttonholes. I've stitched my buttons on the opposite side. And I'll open up my buttonholes using my unpicker. Now you can unpick that hand basing or tacking from the collar band if you chose to sew it that way. It's also handy to do this stitch in a contrasting thread so you don't forget to do it. And there you go, you should be finished your shirt. To start, we're going to begin with the pocket section. As you can see here, I've already finished the edges on the curved sides. Now right sides together, I've got a front and back section as you can see here. From here, we're just going to match the notches and pin the pockets to the side edges. Now it's time to sew those pockets to the side edges. You should have 4 pockets in total to sew. After you've sewn the pockets to the short section, finish that edge by using an overlocker or a serger stitch, and while you're using your overlocker, just be careful not to trim off any excess fabric. Now you can see that I've overlocked the side edge, but I've still got the seam allowance there. We're now going to press the seam outwards, with the front section facing right sides up, and repeat this on the remaining front and back sections. Now understitch on those pocket seams on the pocket side. Right sides together, pin the front and back sections together and around the curved section of the pocket. And pin the remaining front and back together. Right sides together, stitch down the seam beginning at the top edge. Pivot here at the pocket. Now stitch the pockets together all the way around that curved edge. Now as you come back over towards the side seam, just stitch right onto the stitching line, pivot upwards, and now we're just going to stitch 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch upwards, and then back down and finish off the side seams. Now open out the front and back section at the side seams. Keep the seam allowance towards the front section and give that a really good press. Our next step is to sew a little bar stitch above and below the openings of the pockets. This will hold the seam allowance. It also provides a stronger seam on the outer edges of the pocket openings. Now place the front and back sections right sides together on the inside leg seam and just stitch this seam. And remember to finish the raw edges once you've stitched the seams together. Now turn one leg section's right sides out and place it inside the remaining leg section. Now it's time to match those centre back notches of the centre back seam and the inside leg seam and the front centre seam. So pin the entire seam and then we're just going to sew that together in one step. So once you've sewn this seam together, don't forget to finish off those raw edges. So as you can see, I've cut a small rectangle of interfacing. I'm just going to fold it in half to find the center and match that to the top edge of the center front seam. And now we'll just fuse that interfacing to the wrong side of the front section. I've marked in my buttonholes, one each side of the center front seam. They are 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch on each side of the center front seam, and that same distance down from the top edge. You can see here this is the facing section completed. I firstly fused the matching sections to the wrong sides of the front and back sections. I then simply stitched the front sections together and the back sections together, and then the front and back together at the side seams. And then I finished off the lower edges with my overlocker or serger. Right sides together, place the facing over the top edge of the short section. And make sure you match your notches, with the double notches being the back section. Once you've pinned it together and check that all your notches align and everything is sitting as it should, stitch the seam in position. I've now stitched the facing to the top edge of the shorts, and I've also pressed the seam upwards towards the facing. I'll now understitch the seam allowance towards the facing side. You can see that I'm stitching right beside the seam. So this is how your understitching should look like. I've now pressed the facing towards the underside. I've also cut out my elastic to the length in the sewing instructions. And now it's time to make the channel for the casing. I'm going to leave a gap at the centre back and we'll stitch around the top. As I'm stitching the casing in position, I'm actually stitching 3 centimeters or 1¼ inches from the top edge. And don't forget to leave that gap on the center back of 5 centimeters or 2 inches. Now it's time to grab a safety pin and thread that elastic through the casing. Now it's time to pin the elastic together and overlap that elastic over 2 centimeters or 3/4 inch. So just take that elastic over to your machine and stitch over the overlap of the elastic. Now slide the elastic into the casing and stitch the gap in the channel down to complete that row of stitching. Now this next step is optional and it's to create a second channel line on the casing. Stretch out your elastic so it's sitting flat and even out your gathers, as you can see how I've done here. Now pin the casing at the side seam and the center front and back. Also pin either side of the buttonholes. This is where we'll begin. You can see here I'm just going to stretch out each quarter as I sew through the casing. There's my next quarter point. Now I'm just stitching in the center of the first line of the casing and the top edge. I've pressed up the hem of my shorts 2 centimeters or 3/4 inch, and I've also finished off the raw edges. Before you stitch the hem, it's a really good idea to just try it on before to see if this is the right length for you. Now it's time to stitch the hems in position. Just take note, if you are sewing the pants view, it is a deeper hem. So just take a look in your instructions to see the depth of the hem for the pants. Right sides together, stitch the tie sections together at the short ends. press that seam open. We're now going to stitch the tie along the long sides of the tie, right sides together. So I've now sewn that seam. It's only about 6 mils or 1/4 of an inch in from the raw edge, that one. Now we're going to turn the tie right sides out. I'm going to use a looper, which does make it a lot easier, but if you don't have one of these, it's completely fine. You can just use a safety pin to pull this out the right way. Now it's time to press the tie. Now I'm just pushing the raw edges inside, and I'll stitch across that to close the seam. Alternatively, you can just turn it over twice and make a small hem. Now all that's left to do is thread the tie through the casing of the shorts. We recommend threading the tie through the lower channel. So once you've pulled the tie through evenly and you've cut off all your threads, you are finished. There you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and you learnt something new today. If you did like this tutorial, please remember to subscribe. It really helps us continue to make videos like this for you all. Thanks so much and see you in the next tutorial.